it's 1 now, and so as I mentioned earlier, we have a really packed schedule, and so we're just going to start right away. I have my co-host India. She will be letting people in, and so yeah, why don't we get started? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Paulia. Welcome to making the most of our Minnesota student survey data. This is the first webinar of the Elevating Youth Voice through the MSS mini-series, and so we welcome you all. The purpose of this mini-series is to inform attendees, so you all, about the benefits of the MSS, provide some strategies to increase MSS involvement, and to learn from local communities how to use MSS data and to use that data to elevate youth health and wellness. And so this webinar series is brought to you by the Minnesota State Epidemiological Outcomes Work Group, or the SEOW, the Minnesota Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Division, the Minnesota Department of Education, and Minnesota Department of Health. So my name, as I mentioned earlier, is Tiffany Paulia, and I am the Research and Technical Assistance Manager for the Minnesota Prevention Resource Center, so MPRC. I will just quickly introduce our speakers here, and then I'll have them take it away. So our speakers today include Liz Curry, who is an evaluator at the Minnesota Department of Health. We have Holly Magnetz, who is the Adult Enrichment and Community Partnerships Coordinator at Hopkins Public Schools. We also have Melissa Adelson, who is a research scientist at Wilder Research. And then we also have Megan Lowe, who is the Senior Research Analyst at the Behavioral Health Division at the Minnesota Department of Human Services. All right. And so on this next slide here, I have just an overview of our agenda today. Today, we will go over what the Minnesota Student Survey, or the MSS, what it is, its importance, and how the data is used both at the state and local level. We'll also talk about community benefits and how to get your school district or administration to participate. We'll also provide some insight on how to access the data. And then we also have some secondary resources that we created that we want to share with you all to support you in this process. At the end of our agenda today, we have allocated time for some questions. And so we invite you all to input your questions in the chat box. We may only have time for a few questions. So if you see a question in the chat that you'd really like a panelist to answer, you can write something like ditto or yes to that question. So that we know to share that question with our panelists. And lastly, as I shared earlier, please remember to mute yourself. We want to avoid any background noise and prevent any distractions for our presenters and our participants today. All right, so now I am going to hand it off to Liz.
Thank you, Tiffany. Hi, all. And as Tiffany mentioned, my name is Liz, and I'm an evaluator with the Injury and Violence Prevention section at MDH, and I'm also the current chair of the State Epidemiological Outcomes Work Group, or the SEOW. I will be kicking us off today and ensuring we all have a shared foundation for our discussion by providing some background on the MSS, sharing why the MSS is important, and providing a couple examples of how state agencies utilize MSS data. So what is the MSS? It's a survey that's conducted every 3 years with schools across the state. The first MSS was conducted in 1989 and was given to students in 6th, 9th, and 12th grades. The grade levels changed in 2013, and currently the MSS is being administered to students in grades 5, 8, 9, and 11. And students in these grades are considered to be adolescents. The MSS is an anonymous survey, so no names or identifying code numbers are collected, and the survey answers cannot be traced to an individual. The survey is entirely optional and voluntary at both the district and individual level, but historically it has had a pretty good response rate with 81% of school districts participating in 2019. And in that same survey year of 2019, more than 170,000 school students participated in the survey, including 66% of fifth graders, 68% of eighth graders, 66% of ninth graders, and 54% of 11th grade students. So public, private, and charter schools, as well as juvenile detention and alternatives to their students. The survey asked questions about numerous different topics, including substance use, connections with school and family, healthy eating, physical exercise, and mental health. Data can be viewed online from the Minnesota Department of Education at the school district and county level, and all state data is available by race, ethnicity, and gender as well. Next slide, please. The MSS is the only survey in the state that captures the adolescent viewpoint regularly and broadly. Other surveys exist, such as the behavioral risk factor surveillance survey, or BRFIS, but these other surveys have a much smaller sample size or are retrospective, meaning that people are asked to reflect back on their experience as an adolescent while they are an adult. The amount of time that passes between adolescence and potential sampling for retrospective surveys often does not allow for the surveys to accurately reflect present-day circumstances of adolescence. The MSS allows for communities, schools, and state agencies to collect relatively recent data on student experience and use the data to inform timely interventions or policy changes. The questions asked on the MSS change to reflect the needs of schools, communities, and to reflect what we know of what could be impacting adolescent health. The flexibility of the MSS supports change makers to advocate for certain questions to be added that might provide insight on disparities. For example, questions related to parental incarceration were added relatively recently and have been incredibly useful in identifying opportunities to support the health and academic achievement of students that have been impacted by incarceration. The MSS also asks about student race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity. This data helps to shed light on how student experiences vary among different groups of students and highlights areas where student well-being could be improved. For example, the MSS has shown that students that identify as LGBTQ+ are much more likely to experience bullying and mental health challenges than students that identify as straight. This data has been used to inform anti-bullying campaigns and school counselor continuing education opportunities. Lastly, the MSS is used really commonly at to secure funding at the state and local levels. And I'll share a few examples of this in the next couple of slides. MSS data has been integral to grant applications that have secured millions of dollars to address multiple different health outcomes, such as adverse childhood experiences, access to reproductive health care, and health equity. Many requests for proposals request data, and the MSS provides a wealth of information on numerous health topics that strengthen funding applications. Next slide, please. So this slide shows some examples of how the MSS has been shared widely by local newspapers and displays the potential of using MSS data to assess disparities in health among students of color. The ability of the MSS to show trends over time, for example, in the bottom right headline that reads, Minnesota student survey finds sharp drop in teen smoking, drinking, and sex, can help to show the impact of prevention initiatives or policy changes. Next slide, please. The MSS is crucial to collecting data on how schools continue to serve as a primary prevention point for students. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted just how important schools are to student health and has many prevention practitioners wondering how the loss of in-person learning has impacted students who no longer have easy access to before and after school programs, free meals or free counseling and healthcare services in the same building. The Biden administration has and seems to be continuing to increase funding for mental health in schools. But as I mentioned on a previous slide, getting funding often requires having data. So local, state, and federal administrations rely on data to identify where to allocate funding and offer grants. The next MSS will be administered between January and June of 2022, and it is so crucial that schools participate to better understand the impact of COVID-19 on students and to help identify strategies to reduce any lasting harms the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced. Next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a lag. So if you hear pauses from me, I'm usually just waiting for the slides to catch up for me. So now that we have an understanding of what the MSS is and why it's important in general, I'm going to provide a few examples of how state agencies utilize the MSS data before diving into how communities use the MSS data. So the Minnesota Department of Education, or MDE, uses the MSS to assess factors and experiences in an adolescent's life that either contribute to or detract from academic achievement, including an emphasis on the link between health, safety, well-being, and educational achievement. Some specific uses include a report on bullying and harassment to support anti-bullying legislation and programs, mandated legislative reports on student engagement and safety, presentations on the link between health assets and educational outcomes, and the data has been used to obtain federal and other grants for health and safety promotion and for quality after-school programs. Next slide. The Minnesota Department of Human Services, or DHS, uses the MSS data to support prevention and treatment efforts related to behavioral health in communities all across Minnesota. Building up community capacity with data skills can help to teach folks how to use and interpret MSS data, as well as data from other sources. MSS data is used for treatment and prevention needs assessments and has been used for multiple grant applications, including for primary prevention grants, such as positive community norms, that works on several levels at once, involving students, parents, teachers, and others in the entire community. Child and youth programming, such as ACEs support with FamilyWise, and multi-generational programming, such as school-based mental health initiatives that connect or co-locate effective mental health services with schools and students at the local level to increase accessibility for children who are under or uninsured, improve identification of mental health issues, and provide support to parents. Next slide. So the Minnesota Department of Health, or MDH, utilizes the MSS within numerous public health surveillance systems and to assess indicators of health equity. MDH incorporates MSS data into many grant applications focused on risk and protective factors. Within the past year alone, MDH has successfully applied for millions of grant dollars focused on improving adolescent and young adult health outcomes in the areas of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, substance use and overdose, and underage drinking and drunk driving. MDH is also mandated by some statute and grant requirements to conduct needs assessments on a regular basis. Needs assessments are intended to identify areas of gaps that could be improved upon, and MDH uses MSS data to support needs assessments, as it is a tremendous time and money saver to have access to MSS data that's collected regularly, rather than needing to develop new data collection methods to collect data across the entire state or in specific regions. Lastly, MDH uses MSS data when providing data to communities. An example of this data sharing is the opioid dashboard developed by the overdose prevention team within the injury and violence prevention section here at MDH. Next slide, please. The opioid dashboard is a compilation of data related to overdoses and substance use from various sources that provides a statewide perspective on the opioid epidemic. The dashboard is intended to show trends over time to inform public knowledge of the opioid epidemic, as well as opportunities for prevention. MSS data is utilized to create the use and misuse among youth graph shown on this slide. This graph allows visitors to the dashboard to easily see that from 2013 to 2019, there was an increase in the percentage of 8th graders that reported using prescription pain medications without a prescription or differently than how a doctor intended. The data shown on this slide is statewide, but as I mentioned, the MSS also has data available at the district and county level. To talk more about that, I'm going to turn it over to Holly, who will be sharing how she has used MSS data in her community to inform prevention efforts.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz. So my name is Holly Magdance, and I have been working with the Hopkins Public School District for 8 years now. And I had the situation of coming into my role with Hopkins Schools, being very, having a lot of support from the district, a long history of support from the district around the Minnesota Student Survey. Since the survey's origins, as we noted, the first survey being 1989, Hopkins Public Schools has heavily used the data to inform our programming, inform our strategies, and I'm here today to really kind of speak more on that local level piece, since we have just heard some really great examples of how the state uses the data, but I'll be focusing a little bit more on the community level. So I came into my role 8 years ago as the coordinator of the Hopkins One Voice Community Coalition, which works to reduce substance use among our community youth. And actually I was brought in under a federal grant project under SAMHSA. And that's another example of why participating in the Minnesota Student Survey is so important, because we as a district have many years of receiving really, really, really helpful federal and state grants that we would not have been able to receive without participating in the Minnesota Student Survey. So as I mentioned before, I came into the district with being very supported in terms of the leadership very much supporting the use of the Minnesota Student Survey and sharing the data to better understand what the changing needs are of our youth. And what I can tell you is that I just really want to highlight the local youth part, because while at the state level or even the county level, we can really look at, really understand as a state or as a county or as a region how our kids are doing. The advantage of having that data aggregated down to the district level is that you can own that as a community and say, this is what our kids are saying, what our kids are thinking, what our kids are feeling. And I think having that really localized perspective also in the larger context of the county and state is really impactful. And that's been something that we've, as a school district and community, taken of high importance when we're looking at the Minnesota Student Survey data and sharing the information. So in terms of timeline, and my role has been to coordinate the administration and presenting of the Minnesota Student Survey data. Moving forward, our staffing and roles have continued to evolve, so that that won't be my role going forward, but I have 8 years and 3 survey administrations experience here to share with everyone. Traditionally, the survey is administered in the winter. I know this year there have been some delays, and Megan and Melissa will talk more about that. But typically in the past, what I've experienced has been administering the survey in those winter, early spring months, and then getting the data back either late spring or in the fall. And one point I just really want to make is that the data is really accessible after you participate and after the state has done their analysis. Both Melissa and Megan are going to share more information about the public dashboard, but it's really important to remember the data is public to everyone. So why, of course, it's anonymous, but you can look at your district's data, your county's data, your state level data, just by accessing the Minnesota Department of Education website. In terms of like additional analysis, that's something that we have chosen to do as well. And by doing some further analysis, you can look at different risk and protective factors and different associations between your district data. But really, a lot of the data you need, the raw percentages, you can find right on the MDE website. For instance, X% of students in 2016 reported using marijuana compared to X% of students in 2019. That kind of data is really easy to pull. So what I wanted to just kind of say is what's worked for us in the past has been when the survey data comes back, what traditionally we've done at Hopkins schools is, the data is huge. So you get a lot of information back. So there has to be some system of kind of prioritizing what you think are the highlights, what you really want to focus on as a school district or as a county or as a community. And then what we've done at Hopkins is put together a comprehensive but still relatively short presentation, because we know people can't listen to data for 2 hours at length. So a comprehensive, maybe 20-minute presentation of some key highlights. First, we present that to the superintendent's cabinet, then present it to the school board. And after that, after the school board has heard that data and has had a chance to discuss it, then we go live in our community. So we give presentations to teachers, to administrators, to parents, to community groups and organizations. So again, the Minnesota Student Survey data, especially at the local level, is really only helpful if you actually use it and you share it and you talk about it. Because this is what our kids are saying about what they're experiencing, how they're feeling. It helps us better understand the changing needs so that we can respond to that and help better support our youth. Another area that we've done some interesting work with our school staff has been around adverse childhood experiences. So by looking at our Hopkins data for adverse childhood experiences and actually going in and doing some further analysis on risk and protective factors, we actually use that information in teacher professional development. And I know the teachers really respond favorably to that, to actually seeing that these are what our kids in grades 8, 9, 5, 11 are saying. And with that, we like to look at together what is actionable. So, there's certain things that as a school district are really hard to control in a child's home. Not impossible, but hard. But then you look at things like, in our data, we saw that students that had multiple adverse childhood experiences had strong protective factors if they thought their teachers cared about them. So when you present that information to teachers saying, we can't prevent everything that's going on in a kid's life, but as a teacher, as school staff, we can show up every day and let our kids know that we care about them, and what that level of protection actually looks like in the real data is really amazing. And I think really affirming of the work that we already do and that we can continue to do better. Really quickly mention parent outreach is another big piece that Hopkins Schools has done with the Minnesota Student Survey data. We've hosted mandatory chemical health awareness meetings, chemical and mental health awareness meetings for our student athletes to reshare some of this data. And again, I think one of the biggest things too is getting the data out to the kids themselves. The students are the ones taking the survey. They're invested in knowing how they're doing and how their peers are doing. And so we've done a lot of work around at Hopkins with mental health campaigns, substance use prevention campaigns, peer-to-peer education, because as we know, teens tend to greatly overestimate unhealthy behaviors of their peers. And so it can be really affirming and empowering for teens to know that actually the social norm is that most of the teens in their local community are making healthy choices. And again, I just want to wrap up and by saying, don't be overwhelmed by the Minnesota Student Survey. That if you participate, hopefully you will get a lot of really rich data. You don't have to present it or share it all at once. I've found in our work with Hopkins that kind of breaking it down into either topics, maybe doing a presentation on ACEs or student mental health, kind of is more digestible than giving a huge presentation on a huge variety of topics. Also, I just little nuggets here and there of like a couple maybe stats in a parent newsletter, or a little story about how this matches with state trends in a parent newsletter or a student communication, I think is from my experience more digestible and comprehensible than kind of those large, big presentations. So I'm going to turn it over now to Megan Lowe, and she's going to continue speaking more about the Minnesota Student Survey and what we can look forward to this year. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Lowe. I work in the Behavioral Health Division at DHS as a senior data analyst, some epi work, and overall project manager. So first, I want to acknowledge Holly and Hopkins as like the golden standard for MSS participation, use, everything. And so what I'm really going to go over today are whether you're starting from scratch or somewhere in between the gold standard and scratch, I'm just going to offer an overview of steps for building buy-in for the survey participation. And encourage the participation in a meaningful way. So number one is identifying MSS champions, because we cannot clone Holly, unfortunately, which is too bad. We need to find people who are genuinely believe in what the MSS can offer to their communities and are passionate about data. And then the next huge step is strengthening partnerships with local schools and local communities. And to do that, you can come in with facts, data, figures, a little bit at a time. And but another part of it is also to provide hope of what the MSS could do for the school and what it could do for your community, which is number three, sharing success stories of how the MSS has been able to impact other schools or other challenging problems that communities have faced before that the MSS could shed light on, or there was data for, and so they were able to get resources or funding to address those. Of course, addressing concerns is necessary to validate and is really an opportunity for everyone to engage with what possibilities the MSS has and what it could really do and the meaning it can create. So to really lean into those concerns and addressing them together is really a strong start. And lastly, to provide positive pressure. So for me, I think of this as like a little bit of keeping up with the Joneses, but maybe more like keeping up with the Hollies and the Hopkins school districts of Minnesota. Okay, next slide, please. So if we want to know what youth are experiencing and feeling at home, in school, in community, the best way is to ask them, right? And so if we ask the youth about their experiences and their perspectives, we also need to be prepared to use what they share. I'm often in meetings and say we don't want DHS in particular to be a black box of information or data. We need to get the data back out to the community so they can do something with it and empower their voices. And so the great thing about the MSS is it covers such a wide range of different topics, and you can really dig into whatever issue seems most pertinent that you're hearing from community members, from the youth. For example, we can look at associations between vaping or suicidal ideation with a host of risk and protective factors that Holly has talked about in her community as well. And this allows communities to really focus in on the most salient factors to address prevention efforts and even intervention. The data has also allowed us in the recent administration to look at emerging needs like increasing rates of depression and anxiety. Another huge and ever expanding positive of the MSS is that it has numerous response options for race and ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity. And this allows us not only to identify disparities, but which protective factors are most robust for specific groups. And a classic, for instance, that comes to mind is the identity of Asian, which can hide differences between Hmong youth and Asian Indian youth versus Korean youth, which often get lumped in together. But as many of us know, within group variance can oftentimes be larger than between group variance. And with the MSS, you can really dig in there and look at how these different ethnicities and races actually differ. Lastly, for this slide, I wanted to talk about how the data are really invaluable at both the state and community level for justifying resources, AKA funding. And once projects are funded through grants and whatnot, the funders' reporting requirements that often come with grants are right there in the MSS and can help evaluate change over time across region to region, community to community, and even with national rates. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is my favorite slide, and it's sort of the theme of this mini-series, which is elevating the youth voices. And so one way we can do that is by going to the youth and presenting them what we learned in the MSS 2019 results. And really empower them and ask them for their interpretations. For example, I went to a coalition meeting maybe a year and a half ago, and at the coalition, there were 2 youth there to sort of represent their voice. And we talked for 30 minutes about how the youth were really affirmed and validated that there were questions about anxiety and depression. And when we talked about the high rates, they said, yes, of course. You know, there's every other friend I know has definitely talked about feeling anxious or talking about depressive symptoms. And so they felt like they were really on target, and just to see them light up and to see them be able to know that they could use whatever information they're giving the state back in their communities was fantastic. One product, an idea to come out of that is that the high schoolers then talked about having wellness champions within their high school and using the MSS data to help inform their peers. So another activity to consider, and I think we will be doing this in our last session. So this is session 1. Session 3, we're going to be focusing on a youth-led session, and I think we're having a few of them put together a small video, and so hopefully that can serve as a model for how to elevate voices around the MSS and their results and the buy-in. And last slide, please. Finally, just building up genuine excitement about findings coming out. As Liz and Holly outlined, I mean, it is a wealth of data. And so really having part of the buy-in being what are the results going to be, and sort of emphasizing the curiosity that it could play is really invaluable, I think. And one way to do that is also to pair a data point with an action step or resource. This can help show in real time, hey, once we have this data point, we can turn this into action. So this is the next thing we do, or this is what's next from whatever the result ends up being. Some of that can be local legislation. I know there's a lot in the works with vaping, and really to have a community waiting, with bated breath for the results to come to see how that can strengthen their argument for local legislation can be really exciting. And another sort of list of ideas for innovative dissemination methods like data parties and data games our friend Melissa has created an awesome handout that will be made available to all of y'all once this is finished. And so I will happily hand it off to her.
Thank you so much, Megan. And everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Melissa Adelson, and I'm a research scientist at Wilder Research. And over the years, I've worked with communities across Minnesota to really dig into their Minnesota student survey data. And I'm also excited to share that Wilder Research will be implementing the 2022 Minnesota Student Survey. So I'm really looking forward to that. So Liz and Holly and Megan all shared ways that we can encourage participation in the survey by getting people excited for the data, making sure that we use the data and elevate youth voice, and just showcasing successes of how communities have changed policies, programs, and practices driven by the data. But we also acknowledge that there are some school districts who might be on the fence about participating in the survey. They may have some concerns or challenges or barriers, and each of you can serve as a Minnesota Student Survey champion by being prepared to sit down and have conversations about those concerns and being equipped with some talking points to address them. So that's how we're gonna kind of wrap up this next session. And importantly, when it comes to the reliability of the data, these talking points can not only be helpful for encouraging districts who might be on the fence about participating, but then also after a school has participated, when sharing the data, sometimes people have questions about whether or not the data are reliable, whether or not students are telling the truth, and whether the data can be trusted. So importantly, as Liz shared, the Minnesota Student Survey is anonymous. And what we see from national surveys and the research is that anonymity really increases respondents' comfort in answering honestly. Surveys with numerous inconsistencies or improbable answers are excluded from the data analysis. So for example, if a youth noted that they used a particular substance multiple times in the past 30 days, but then in a later survey question about general frequency, say they've never used that substance before, we can throw out those cases where it's pretty evident that there are some strong inconsistencies. But really the majority of students exhibit patterns of responses that are reasonable and consistent across similar questions. In addition, percentages for many answers are consistent over time. For example, there's a set of questions that ask youth to what extent they feel others in their lives care about them. And over time, from Roseau County down to Winona County, we see that youth are most likely to feel that parents and other adults, family members care about them, and least likely to feel that teachers and other adults in the community care. As another example, consistently over time across the state, we see that youth are more likely to report use of things like alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana than they are to report heroin and meth use. And such similarities are likely to occur only if the survey responses really reflect the actual perceptions and behaviors of the youth. It's extremely unlikely that these patterns could be replicated by chance alone over time. Also, our MSS results are often consistent with findings in similar states and also with national trends related to increasing or decreasing behaviors. So for example, here in Minnesota, similar to other states and across the nation, we had been seeing declining trends in tobacco use over time, which were then reversed with the introduction of vaping products. Also consistent over time that we're seeing nationally are some increases in some mental health concerns that were addressed earlier. So this combination of individual response patterns, plausible relationships among the answers, consistency over time, both within the state and with what we're seeing nationally, can really attest to the overall credibility of student responses. And I would also add, as the others have shared, if we're going to ask youth in our communities to spend the time taking this comprehensive survey, we should really do the honor of believing that they're telling the truth and making sure that we're using their data to inform change. So another concern that comes up is survey fatigue. We hear schools are burnt out, students are burnt out, the MSS is just one more survey to take. So it's really important to make sure that all relevant school staff and partners are aware of what's on the survey and how they can use the data from the MSS to avoid them trying to implement their own surveys over and above the MSS that might be capturing some of the same information. Also making sure that within the school district, the survey is being administered at the right time in the school year and during the school day to avoid other large testing or survey periods, such as standardized tests, finals, or common college entrance exam time. You know, and another strategy that's already been talked about is really building students' excitement about participating. Because just as districts can opt in to participate, students can also opt to not take the survey. So by sharing with students the positive changes that have resulted from their survey responses, such as new programming, new services, it can help them see how important it is to participate. And can make the experience of participating in the survey something really positive, and it allows them to see the value to them in participating. And as Megan noted, the third webinar in this mini series is going to feature youth talking about why they feel the MSS data are important and how they've used it. Another concern that we hear about are parents and community members who might be concerned about some of the questions that are asked on the Minnesota Student Survey. And what we see from the research literature is that respondents generally perceive more benefits to participating in studies that ask sensitive questions than distress from participating in those. Specifically, people tend to identify value in sharing their experiences or disclosing a phenomenon that could potentially benefit or help others or help contribute to a larger purpose from the study. As an example, Minnesota communities have really relied on the Minnesota Student Survey to gather youth data on adverse childhood experiences to help make the case for implementing trauma-informed policies and practices in their schools and communities. And while the ACEs questions are sensitive, they ask about domestic abuse in the home, physical and sexual abuse, parental incarceration. Being able to use that information to inform policies and strategies is just so beneficial. And by sharing that data back with the community, it's really, again, elevating youth voice and showing youth how their responses are contributing to changing strategies and efforts in the community that are overall positive. Also, just because we don't know about a behavior doesn't mean that it's not happening. We can better address issues and support students if we understand their worlds and their realities. Another type of sensitive question on the survey are questions about suicidal ideation and attempt. But when communities have access to their local youth data on experiences of suicidal ideation, they can better plan and try to prevent those experiences through programming in the schools and in the broader community. And as we've talked about too, it also helps communities take a look at disparities to see if there are specific student groups in their community who are more likely to experience suicidal ideation. Studies have also shown that most study participants identify that daily stressors in their lives, homework, tests, what they're going to do after school, tend to be more distressing to them than being asked sensitive questions in a study or on a survey. And in one 2014 study, specifically looked at the amount of time it took a participant to recover after experiencing some distress as part of a study or a survey. And the majority of respondents did not reach a high level of distress during the study, even though the whole purpose of the study was to elicit distress. And of those who did experience distress, most reported that they recovered immediately after finishing their participation. And schools can also take steps to make sure that there are supports in place if any students do experience distress after a sensitive question. So steps that can be taken are, again, to really explain the purpose of why those questions are being asked, to let youth, parents, school staff, and community members know about how those data are vital to communities and the state being able to respond to the issues, to secure funding, to secure resources, to dedicate staff to addressing those needs. Also, students are allowed to skip questions that they don't want to answer. schools and survey proctors can work to provide a positive or at least a neutral activity right after the survey to give students a little bit of time to get over any distress that might have been caused by a triggering question. And then schools can also take steps either within their school or in the broader community to have resources at the ready for any students who don't recover right away from any distressing questions that are asked. So now I wanted to transition into talking about how to access the Minnesota Student Survey data. Liz and Megan talked about this great portal, and there's a handout that's going to be made available with the slides about different ways, innovative approaches to disseminating data that also has a link to this. And while we didn't want to switch gears and move over to the site live, this is a screenshot of what you'll see. And you're able to use those drop-down menus to select a specific district or county. In the screenshot, I pulled up Anoka-Hennepin. Data are available on here for 2013, 2016, and 2019. That category drop-down field allows you to take a look at specific clusters of questions from the survey. So in addition to activities, which you can see in the screenshot, so participation in pro-social activities within the school and broader community, there's also a category of demographics that allow you to take a look at data by race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender identity as your district or county's sample size permits. There's a category for family and relationships where you can find information about ACEs and caring family members. There's buckets for health as well as mental health. For risk factors, a category for school such as educational engagement, usual grades received, one for sexual health, and then finally one for substance use. And then it's a little bit clunky to use, but still like a great resource. You do have to search by separate grade level. So you can search for 5th, 8th, 9th, and 11th. So if you want to look at, let's say, past 30-day alcohol use from the substance use category, you would need to run that for grades 8, 9, and 11 separately. And importantly, there are separate survey tools. So there's a 5th grade survey tool, which is considerably shorter and doesn't have some of the more sensitive questions related to ACEs, substance use, and suicide. There's another version for 8th graders, and then there's a more comprehensive version for 9th and 11th graders. So you'll note that you might not find certain items for 5th and 8th graders. And then lastly, there is a drop-down menu for demographics. So again, going back to that example, if you're searching for 2019 Anoka-Hennepin data on pro-social activities among 5th graders, you can also then choose to see those data by gender, by race, and these are the broader race categories, not the fully expanded 25 plus. You can also view the data by free and reduced price lunch and by whether or not the student receives special ed. So that's just kind of another way that you can take a robust look at your data using this, or like the examples that Megan shared, if you perhaps have an activity or an assignment that students are asked to do, they can use this tool to really dig into their own local data. In addition to the Minnesota Department of Education portal, there are also a couple of other ways to access your local data. The Minnesota Center for Health Statistics does have PDF reports on their website. These are at the regional and county level, as well as some demographic reports. Also, it's possible if you're working with an evaluator or a statistician in your community to request an SPSS data file so that you can dig in and do your own analysis. And there is a link and a process for doing that. You simply have to share, how you will be using the data, how the data will be shared, who will have access to it. And to go through that request, you either need to reach out to your superintendent and get a letter of permission from them, or the automated request system will send them an automated email to that superintendent so they can approve your request. Also, there's a website, a Substance Use in Minnesota, which is sumn.org. And while this doesn't have all of the data from the Minnesota Student Survey, it does have data on substance use, some indicators of mental health, and then a whole host of risk and protective factors. And that allows you to search at the county level by grade and gender, and search at the state level by race, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. Also, if you dig around on that website, there's a reading room and a resource page that has a number of reports that have been produced using the Minnesota Student Survey by topic or by demographic group. And then for those of you who are part of a substance use coalition or in your community or work with a substance use coalition, there is a process for requesting some help with analysis or presenting the data in a fact sheet or a report or a presentation. And so you can reach out to your regional prevention coordinator. There's a link there for that, and they'll connect you with the individual who provides data-related technical assistance. So now I'm gonna pass it back to Tiffany.
Awesome, thank you all so much. So on this next slide here, I just wanted to share with you all, as I mentioned earlier, I work for the Minnesota Prevention Resource Center, or MPRC. And at MPRC, we provide support for individuals and organizations in Minnesota on topics such as substance abuse prevention, and we provide resources and technical assistance. So earlier this year, we worked very closely with the SUOW team. So a lot of the panelist members on this call, we worked with them to create these two secondary resources to support you all. So as you can see here on the left of your screen, this one pager right here, it provides some basic information on what the MSS is, some of the benefits to schools and districts who participate in the MSS, and it also kind of talks about how you can sign up to participate in this survey. And so basically this document right here is kind of like a very short summary of what all of the panelists have talked about today. And then we also have here on in the center of the screen here another document that provides guidance to how coalitions and community members how they can organize and advocate for their school district's participation in the MSS. And so if you look here on this slide, this document just provides 4 steps on how community members and coalition members can, reflect on their community, identify their partners and on how they can collaborate with them, and then also how they can take action as well too. And so these resources are available for you to download at our MPRC website linked on this slide right here. You can feel free to check these documents out there. All right, so now we have some time for questions, and I'm just going to quickly check in our chat box here. I know we had a few questions that came in earlier, and so I am just going to read this first question out loud, and between Megan, Melissa, Holly, and Liz, whoever has the answer for it, feel free to chime in. So this first question that we have here is, are the respondents reflective of the ethnic and racial proportions across Minnesota?
Sorry, I was trying to find mute. One thing I can say is that this has been evolving. So I think it was back in 2013 when there were first response options added for Hmong and Somali. And it was only just in 2019 when the race ethnicity categories were expanded to 25 plus. So it might take time. What I do know is that Minnesota Compass recently produced some cultural community profiles based on Census and American Community Survey data. And the populations that they created profiles for are nearly identical, with one exception, to the race ethnicity response options that were added to the MSS. And that was based on population size within the state. And the response options that we saw for those racial and ethnic categories really did reflect the sizes of the population that we saw. And I don't know if someone else from the MSS team can speak to the process of adding new race ethnicity response options as a particular population grows in the state.
Hi, this is Megan. I'll just chime in. I just want to underline what Melissa already said. And as a member of the MSS work group, I would say we definitely are trying to be as inclusive and change inclusive oriented as possible. And so I know we were able to add even more race ethnicity identities for the 2022 as well.
Awesome, thank you, Melissa and Megan. I have here a question. Are we ever going to be able to search more than the one grade level at a time?
I think that would be an MDE question, since they house the database, and probably also a question of resources.
Very true, very true. Thank you. Let's see here. We have a question from Lori. So someone mentioned a delay. Should we expect a delay in the release of the survey, or was that referring to a delay in receiving results?
Megan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Sorry, can you repeat that? I was trying to find it in the chat, so I fully understood the question.
Sorry, yeah, I re-pasted it in the chat.
I don't see it coming up. Is the question just a general delay? So I am now able to say, since the contract is executed, that, and I think Melissa shared this earlier, that Wilder Researcher will be the vendor. And so it's, as far as the historical timeline, we're delayed probably a month and a half. So we still are very hopeful that we can maintain the timeline, but I want to be upfront about just the delay that we've experienced thus far. With that said, I think, again, we're still very hopeful that we can get to the administration in January. And as far as getting the results back, I can't really speak to that yet. I think we'll see what all rolls out, but there's been a large sort of changing of the guard at the MSS work group. I myself am one of the newest members. Jackie Freud has also joined us, and so there's a lot of sort of newbies, and we're just learning and trying to stick to the timeline as much as possible.
All right, thank you so much, Megan. Sorry, I must have sent it elsewhere, the question elsewhere, but thank you so much. All right, so just to be mindful of our time as well too, I think those are all of the questions that were posted, and thank you all so much for that. I do want to share with you all that, as I mentioned earlier, this is a 3-part mini-series. And so our second part of the webinar will take place next month, and I hope to get the registration link to you all after this webinar today. We are still finalizing some details, but I do want to share with you all that this upcoming webinar, we will have panelists from, I believe, Itasca County, Washington, and Clay County, who will be there to talk about how communities use the MSS data to secure funding, drive planning, evaluate successes, and increase collaboration between organizations and community members. And so we hope to see you all there if you're interested. That is all that we have for you all today. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or if you have anything that you would like to talk with us about related to the MSS survey. This is a list of our contact information, so please feel free to reach out to us. All right. Well, you all have a great, wonderful day, and hope to see you all soon.